realize that all damage is reflected by 300%, and it's amazing. It really is. You know, I had good times when I was 13. We are loaded in though. We are ready to kick things off on Gigantha, and we have in the top right our red Zerg player. He is Denver.
And down here in the bottom left-hand side of the map, we have the blue Protoss player from Team Roddy. He is Goblin.
Yeah, Goblin had some fun games. I think the most interesting part about the way this group played out in the situation we're in, Fear Dragon, is that both Denver and Goblin each took a series off the top players in the group in order to be here. So Denver had the series win against Uthermal, who's above both of them, and Goblin had the series win against, I believe it was DNS, who is also above both of them. So it's kind of a really weird situation because both of them are apparently capable of punching above their, their weight class. However, going up against each other, that's, for me, it's just another element that makes this match a whole lot more interesting to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think it's also pretty fun because back last season, I remember Denver getting actually a decent amount of hype from Roddy. In fact, Roddy was given hype to, I think, both Vanya and Denver as really, really strong candidates. And of course, we all know that Roddy has put absurd amounts of hype behind Goblin. I think that they're both very capable of doing exactly what you're talking about, punching above their weight level. So I'm interested to see how this one goes. I also think it's worth mentioning the Cats talked to our young lad. Goblin kind of got his thoughts on this match. And apparently what Goblin was saying was that if we can bring it to the later stages, if Denver doesn't just get in my face super early on, he's feeling pretty comfortable about it.
All right, well, that's something really interesting, I think, to keep in mind, because like we've seen Goblin play that Stargate style, and we know that it's popular for a multitude of reasons. There's a lot of different things that go into and out of that those styles in terms of what you can get away with, right? And I think that Denver should definitely be trying to keep his eyes open for those opportunities, whether it comes to the what was it called, the German Uber ride or something like that, where they just bring the queens and stuff right across. And I think something like that is something you always have to be worried about if you want to play Stargate, because you do have that big period of vulnerability, and as good as Void Rays can be, they don't do bonus damage to queens, they don't do bonus damage to Ravagers, and if they're the only defense that you have against a push like that, you're generally in for a pretty rough time. So Goblin also, while he does whatever he's going to do, needs to be very aware of what Denver throws at him, because if I'm him, I'm thinking the same thing that you're saying there, Ravi, which is I don't want to just let Goblin sit there and build up the Golden Armada, for free and just do it easily.
Yeah, and one thing I will commend Goblin for is that he has, of course, been going into Void Ray memes and whatnot as well. He has been mixing in like some Phoenix openings and some other things. And I think Zombie Guard was doing a great job talking about this yesterday, where it's some of the power of that double Stargate opening and why it's not just Goblin doing it. It's a lot of Protoss players. There is actually some variety that comes out of it. You can open up into those Void Rays, or you can go for the Oracle opening. You can go into the double Phoenix kind of, or 5 or so Phoenix. You can go into like mass Phoenix. You can go into really fast tech up to carriers. You can actually transition out and not really double down on the Stargate and go into Twilight Council. It's a very diverse opening. So Denver also has to keep an eye out on all of that.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, because it's not difficult once you open Stargate. Okay, yeah, your cybernetics core is there. You can already start upgrades for it if you want to. And that's the thing that the Zerg always have to have their eyes on, especially early on. Is that cyber core still spinning? Have the gateways transformed yet? Is this one of those weird second pocketed Stargate builds that are somewhere and it's actually just +1 instead of warp gate? Am I literally playing versus Rotterdam? Another question you could ask yourself in that situation. And perhaps you are, because Fear Dragon, that second Stargate is coming. Of course, we had warp gate, but that's one thing to keep our eyes on, is that cybernetics core, whether he wants to use it. The Overlord does come in and get that scout. This is really important for Denver, because I think if you see anything else, you kind of have to have a completely different response. He's getting a Roach Warren, but we know that that's not necessarily because he wants to use Roaches. It could be for that Ravager type play or push. Obviously, if you land the Corrosive Vials, you can still hit air units and they still do a lot of damage.
Yeah, it's always something to be keeping an eye out for. A handful more Zerglings being made, but still a lot of drones just being added on. So Denver getting up to the healthy kind of 50-ish workers, and continue to go on forward as he does a great job of actually really pushing back the Oracle. The Oracle's able to get, I think, 2 drone kills, maybe 1 or 2 Ling kills there as well, but overall a solid defense. And since there isn't a second Oracle really following this up, well, I was gonna say that should be mostly close to the end of the Oracle damage, but it's fine. They had a few more kills here and there for transferring workers.
Yeah, a little pickup here and there. Forge and Twilight Council are coming in. And of course, the obvious nice part about using Void Rays to defend instead of just Oracles like back in the day is they don't run out of bullets. You can just sit there, keep lasering down and defend. They don't have that same, DPS output versus the light units, but that sustained defense at all is really nice to have. So +1 melee boots up for Denver. Of course, with the amount of Lings that we expect to be used for Harass or Baneling drops later on, that upgrade's always going to be big. What I'm curious about Fear Dragon is he gonna go big into Hydras as this finishes? Is he gonna go with range first, or is he gonna try to take speed for getting across the map? I want to know if Denver's planning an assault on his opponent, because I'm still looking for those later game tech infrastructure investments.
I think usually you're gonna have to start thinking about making a decent chunk of those Hydras soon, just because one of the really common plays for this style is that you are gonna be potentially a bit proactive with those Void Rays, not just moving around the map to pick off some Overlords here and there, but you actually kind of look and say, hey, if those Void Rays have flown up to toward the top left-hand side, there's not creep technically connecting to the 4th base. There's like maybe a potential pick-off opportunity there. The Queens have a hard time dividing up the space between, the main base where the Oracle could run in and that top left-hand base. Just little things like that. But it seems like it's just going to be those 6 Hydras. The Queens are sitting at that top left-hand base in preparation, and a Spire being added on.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of those Void Ray hit squads too. If you're in a position where you don't have to be scrambling on the defense, we've seen them Voids. You try to find a path around the outside of the map. Those spotterlings are not just for expansions or ground units. You want to be able to know if a Void Ray is coming around the corner to just turn on that prismatic alignment and you're suddenly eating, hundreds of DPS onto your hatchery, and there's no way that you could possibly save it. Those are the kinds of things you have to consider. So here's that late game we were talking about. The Spire is finishing, but the Infestation Pit's coming in halfway done. So now I'm getting that expectation of a movement towards Hive or something. But the hard part about this Fear Dragon is that Goblin has been allowed to just kind of chill. He's got Storm, he's got Stargates, he's got his upgrades coming in. There are some, I think it was a Corruptor he had in production. I'm not sure if he canceled that. Yeah, he canceled the Corruptor and went into Hydras instead. I was going to say, if he's building Corruptors against a guy who's already pretty much only got Void Rays, that's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Yeah, it doesn't always pan out quite the way you want if they're not really teching up into the carriers or anything just yet. But yeah, I mean, I really, really wonder how this game is going to go, because this is one of those funny situations, Nate, where you approach the series and you say something to yourself like, I think I'm feeling really confident and comfortable if they just kind of let me do my thing. And then imagine Denver lets Goblin do his thing. And of course, there's the bright side case of, hey, Goblin just kind of steamrolls Denver because he was confident and he had a right to be. But if you get taken out, if Denver is actually really just also confident in this late game stage and he's able to beat Goblin, really just beat him down with a really solid reaction to this big Sky Toss army, as we've seen a lot of other players do this week, I kind of get a little bit more worried for Goblin going into a game 2. It's like, it's not just the loss of game 1.
No, for sure. That's the biggest takeaway I think that you could have from this game, is that so little has happened in the early phases of it that there's been more than enough opportunities that whoever wins this first game, I'm going to feel very confident in moving forward, right? Because there wasn't any trickery. Nobody had a bunch of drones killed for free at the start, or a mineral line left open, a wall unheld, a zealot unholded on position, right? So this becomes a very, very tense moment. Going into carriers, they're not out yet. He does have Storm. So the Hydras, we talk about how with the range, with the DPS they have, the Void Rays are not really strong against them. But with the shield battery to keep the Void Rays alive for a little bit, that's when you're saying, okay, Storm is going to buy all the time I need. Zerg has to retreat. And he has all of the tools that he needs in place as well. So we're going to have 6 Corruptors added to this with the Greater Spire coming in. I believe there are also a handful of Vipers on the map. Zergler's going to take that Stasis Trap, but look how patient he's trying to be. Good spread on these Hydras. I think you're kind of worried about getting cut off. If he, I think he can fight half of this at a time, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that Denver will have to be very wary of as these Hydras are starting to come on forward. The Ling's about to come out of that stasis trap, so they'll absorb some of the cannon shots, but we already seen all out retreat. This is really just not going to get broken without any reinforcements really coming on in. And like you were saying, Nate, those carriers are starting to pop out more and more. We have the next 3 carriers on the way, Flux Veins on the way, plus 2 air weapons. And I mean, I guess actually speaking of the air weapons and stuff, we have +1 carapace for the air army of Denver. I think actually really, really important to also complement your opponent's air weapons with your own armor upgrades. Those carriers really scale up with air weapons, but they also scale down as you get armor upgrades.
Yeah, that's what makes those corruptors super important, is we've got a drop on the southeast heading towards that 3rd base. But I couldn't agree with you more, Fear Dragon. I mean, the Corruptors start with 2 carapace, so investing in those upgrades for it make them progressively way stronger. But it looks like Denver, as this drop comes in, he should be able to get the veins on these probes, picking off 10 plus here, 17, 19 workers. Incredible. But I think that's a really important thing you're touching on. But what is perhaps more fascinating is that he actually built 7 Broodlords. So he wants to have that ability to push down the High Templar so that he can create space for his other units, rather than relying on a writhing mass of corruptors, because he doesn't have the supply necessary anymore with this many units. Just because of the drone count, the queen count, and the Hydra count, he can't build enough corruptors to just try to win a straight up air fight. And he doesn't necessarily even want to either, because there's a lot of Void Rays mixed in here. But you are going to need them to tank the carriers, and also finish them off if you get into a close trade situation where you're able to get through those Void Rays with your Hydralisks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's kind of funny. I feel like I've actually seen a surprising number of Zerg players also say, I'm going to make a handful of Ultras to help deal with the High Templars and stuff on the ground, or any Disruptors, just because the Ultras are, while they will get absolutely shredded by the air army, if there are a bunch of Corruptors also in the air, you can kind of distract all those Voiders and everything. High Templars have nothing to protect them. Kind of just A moves itself in just okay. But yeah, the Broodlords can absolutely work. You just have to be very careful about the positioning of everything, as we're going to start to see those battles coming out. And the Spore Crawler army is also very important to back up those Broodlords and the Corruptors.
Yeah, it becomes a dance, a salsa, if you will, between the High Templar trying to zone the ground units away and get feedback on the Vipers, and then the Zerg. You want the Broodlords to force those air units to come towards you so the Viper can get those abducts. Good feedback immediately, able to grab a couple Broodlords too, and he's already researched tectonic destabilizers on those Tempests, so they're able to bring down the Spore Crawlers pretty easily with the rest of these units not engaging in the fight. So the Void Rays immediately pop on. He actually saved a couple of those prismatic alignments just so that the Corruptors couldn't time it perfectly, or either that or it was a beautiful mistake. But the Broodlords are going to get killed. The carriers are all still alive, just about. There's one very low in the back. Might try to dive in on this, but I feel like Goblin has held this decently well so far.
Yeah, I think he
hasn't lost the most expensive units in his army.
Yeah, he took some really good trades there. I think there were also some nice moves, not only using the High Templars for the Storm, but also feedbacking a decent chunk of those queens just to reduce the amount of transfuses available, especially the queens on the further back line, since those are the ones that are not going to be doing the transfuses rather than just getting attacked and needing a transfuse. Now the Spore Crawler army gets taken out over here with the Mothership finished up, and yeah, Denver is back up to max supply, and he's going to be going for that Mothership, but an expensive pickoff, I would say.
Yeah, and that's, well, I mean, it's like a chicken and the egg kind of question, right? Is the Mothership built so that it dies, or is the Mothership built to be protected, right? Does the Mothership support the army, or does the army support the Mothership? Nobody likes answering that question because it removes the ability to complain about how expensive it is. There's that Ultralisk Cavern that you were talking about, though. A couple of extra Vipers are going to be added, and I really do feel like the most important tool for picking apart these kinds of armies has to be the Viper, the long-range pull, getting them in. But at the same time, if you don't have workers, those Broodlords are really exposed because Goblin had already invested into Tempest before the Broods were even at his base. And the whole point of how the Tempest works is you don't need a lot of them to kind of neutralize that threat. So this is a huge amount of Corruptors that DreamHack's on trying to get a couple picks, but none to be found. And actually really nice there. Goblin gets a good amount of damage done to that army while continuing to progress towards that base in the northwest.
Yeah, I feel like Goblin has been getting the better end of a lot of these engagements, but Denver is also doing some really nice other attacks on other sides. He's been shutting down some of the additional bases. This is the first time Goblin's really finally gotten on his opponent's side of the map and shut something down outside of just a small Zealot run. Both of the Oracles getting picked off over there. That is a very nice snag, as having some of that vision very important for these Tempests and even for the High Templars to potentially get feedbacks and stuff off. I think that the Revelation should be expiring soon, and that may prompt Goblin to retreat. No, he's just going to keep going.
Yeah, he's getting into position, continuing to eat up these hatcheries. And why shouldn't he? He hasn't been forced to use his recall. He still has that eject button if necessary. More corruptors are going to be built, but at this point, getting the target fire when there's this much damage in the army is so tough. I mean, I feel like you're hoping that almost building like Ravagers at this point, just because the air army is clumping up. But look at the way that he peels those Tempests back away from the front line. There's the Storms as the Corruptors come diving in. So they dive onto the army, but the closer you get, the more effective those Void Rays are going to be. And yes, Ultralisks can tank, but you know, they're not actually killing this army at all. So Parasitic Bomb is going to wear off. Corruptors are going to dive forward, get one pick. Fear Dragon, the problem is he's still giving up ground. His Goblin's still maxed out. I don't even think he's using all of his production. I don't even think he has enough supply to do so with the way that this has gone down. Maybe now, but as soon as this hive gets popped, like, what exactly is your plan anymore as Denver?
I think that he really just needs, if he had the energy for it, he could have maybe had like 1 or 2 more Parasitic Bombs that I think could have done a lot more over here. But now the shields are regenerated. Even with the 1 or 2 more Vipers coming on out, I don't know that's actually going to be enough to take on this army anymore. Yeah, he throws out some Parasitic Bombs. Yes, the Corruptors are target firing down some of these carriers, but even with all that being said and done, this army still stands strong, and there's no more real production capabilities here for Denver. He's kind of out of gas.
Yes, well, literally as well. GG Goblin is going to take game number 1. Fear Dragon, I have a compliment for you prepared after that game, because he did actually have the air armor that we don't see Protoss players generally prioritize when they want to play Sky Toss. We all know that the attack upgrades scale stupidly well with the air units, because, you know, the Phoenix versus Light, yeah, those upgrades are huge. We know the carrier attacks really fast. Those Void Rays are strong versus armor. But having a little bit of extra durability in that sort of fight, I think he had a shield upgrade coming into right around the time he was taking that engagement. Just really well-rounded play. And I think that it's hard to beat a Protoss if you don't do anything to them early on and they just build that army and they can get all those upgrades without really risking anything. Then it becomes a very tough fight to take. Because I think if you try to be that greedy on Denver's side of things, then I think it's a little bit easier to just get killed for it, right?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the time that we've seen Zerg players try to play the little bit more defensive, pulled back version of whatever they were trying to do, is they are able to get up that kind of spore forest that is their defensive backbone. If there is a push out or an attempted move out there from the Protoss player, it at least gets very slowed down. So you can take those little trades back and forth. It's kind of that, like you were saying, that little tango between the two players. But as you start to maybe lose some ground, or you lose energy on your Vipers or something, you have the time, thanks to all of those spore callers that the Protoss player doesn't just want to directly move into, to go get more energy, to replenish some of that army supply and take the rest of the map behind it. I don't really feel like Denver was able to do that. He kind of started to do a little bit of that at the front lines, but I feel like a lot of his spores and everything just got picked off really quickly.
Yeah, well, to me, like we can get, we'll jump way more into that. We'll introduce the players first, but I could not agree with you more, Fear Dragon. Spawning in the bottom right, we have the blue Protoss player representing Team Rate. He is Goblin.
And down here in the bottom left-hand side of the map, we have the red Zerg player representing Team Opion. He is Denver.
Yeah, no, I got like you were just saying, all of those things end up having such a huge impact at the end of the day, and that was such a confident game out of Goblin. Honestly, I really don't see how or why Denver would make the choice to try and bring this to be a long game as well. you know, because at the same time, he still got to do everything he wanted to do. There wasn't a big move out or attack. The Void Rays were never even sent as like a hit squad or anything to his base. So he was allowed to do whatever he wanted as a response to knowing that this air army was coming, and it didn't work out. So if you're not trying to make some sort of change up, or, you know, unless there's a huge critical mistake somewhere that we all just missed because, you know, we're not Zerg players, then I have to wonder if this is where he breaks out a little cheddar. You know, maybe we see that the German lift ride come in and we bring those queens and everything over and go for the big push. I feel like that's going to give him maybe a good confidence reset to go to a long game 3 if it comes to it. But I would be shocked if Denver's like, yeah, no, let's just do that again. You can build all your carriers and Void Rays and everything, and I'm just gonna go for a bunch of Hydras into Brood Lords, and I'm just gonna make it work this time. I don't see that happening with how smooth the progression of Goblin's build went.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. Kind of interesting note is I feel like Blackburn, it's not like it's no Beckett industry, but I do feel like it is a little bit rare to see sometimes some of these PvZs on whatnot on Blackburn. So interested to see how this map actually ends up panning on out. We have already, even though Goblin just went for the pylon scout, not like the immediate game start, send the probe out like a mana style, try and block the hatchery. Denver still just kind of takes the third base. He's actually just totally fine with that. And we're going to have still a normal-ish looking setup afterwards. But I want to get your thoughts, Nate. How do you feel about another Sky Toss game and stuff on this kind of map?
Well, this map, it has to be even stronger on this map, right? You have such a direct and clear air path to the enemy. If you're able to zone off the primary bridge or whatever it's going to end up being that Denver would use to go across the ground, if you can have maybe cannons and batteries with the option to warp in zealots and some storm left behind, I think it's a million times easier, isn't it, to just run your air units across that huge gap? You're not going to get caught by anything. And the slow zones, yeah, they suck, but at this level of play, the distance, you know, for the rush, at least by air, is still short enough that if you're paying attention and you're familiar with how unit DPS works, and these guys are all very familiar with that, of course, then you know when to pull out and not get your unit stuck in the slow zone to die. At least I would hope.
Yeah, pretty quick lair coming out over here for Denver, as you know, his third base is not even technically finished up in that natural expansion, and that lair is already halfway done right now. So as the Void Ray picks off some of the overloads, I want to note that Goblin did stay pretty defensive with his first Void Ray in the last game. He might change that up this game, especially since you were talking about how great this map is for those air units to just kind of maneuver around. But yeah, if he did decide to keep it back, maybe that would also play a little bit into Denver's favor with kind of, yeah, again, how that last game went. He might be expecting, oh, well, Goblin will play a little more defensive with his Void Ray. Maybe he won't scout the main, but nope, doesn't catch any sort of luck. Already sees to finish the lair.
Yeah, and that's the thing. In this kind of situation, even if you go over there and you can't kill a bunch of stuff, the unit still scouts. So you don't even need to make a Phoenix that goes there quickly. But that lair was for the Overlord drop. So it actually, is he bringing queens? Is this just going to be queenlings? Is what it looks like. Yeah, he's got 3 queens. Four of them loaded up. Lings are pushing the front, and I assume he's either going to try to elevate her in the back of the main or just use everything to reinforce the front and just take this to a straight all into the natural.
This is going to get to be a very, very interesting and rough game, because if that Void Ray catches that drop Overlord a little bit early, catches wind of it, I mean, now we have 2 Void Rays. I just want to really quickly note, Nate, Overlords, subject to prismatic alignment. I believe that does, in fact, kill them very quickly.
It does, actually. The Void Ray is also an amazing counter to Overlords, as weird as it sounds. Never thought I'd have to say that in a professional broadcast, but here we are. And Goblin takes the 2-0. So